The locker room echoed with the sharp clang of metal doors, but it was the sting of Connor's words that cut deeper. "You're such a freak, Elliot," his older brother sneered, shoving him against the cold tiles. 16-year-old Elliot Hayes, small for his age, but with a fire in his green eyes, bit his lip to keep from crying, knowing tears would only fuel Connor's cruelty. Elliot had always known he was different. Growing up in the sleepy town of Maplewood, Virginia, where pickup trucks and church potlucks defined the rhythm of life, he'd felt like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. He'd hidden his truth for years, burying it under fake laughs and forced crushes. But last summer, in a moment of reckless courage, he'd told Connor he was gay. His brother's reaction, a mix of disgust and mockery, had been a punch to the gut. Since then, Connor, the Golden Boy quarterback, had made it his mission to torment Elliot at home, where their parents' obliviousness gave him free rein. Elliot pulled his hoodie tighter, escaping the locker room and weaving through Maplewood High's crowded halls. His best friend, Jamie Torres, was waiting by his locker, her blue-streaked hair a beacon of defiance in the sea of conformity. "You look like you just survived a horror movie," she said, tossing him a granola bar. "Connor again?" "Always," Elliot muttered, forcing a smile. Jamie was the only one who knew his secret, the only one who made him feel like he wasn't broken. They'd been inseparable since middle school, bonded over late-night talks, and shared dreams of escaping Maplewood. Jamie, with her sharp wit and fearless spirit, was his anchor. That afternoon, the air shifted. Elliot sensed it as he walked into history class, where whispers buzzed like static. His classmates' eyes darted toward him, some smirking, others averting their gazes. His stomach churned as he slid into his seat, catching a glimpse of a crumpled note passed between two jocks. The words scrawled in Connor's messy handwriting hit like a sledgehammer. "Elliot's a fairy. Spread the word." By lunch, the rumor had spread like wildfire. The cafeteria, usually a chaotic blur of chatter, felt like a stage where Elliot was the unwilling star. "Hey, Hayes, got a boyfriend yet?" a senior yelled, prompting laughter that echoed in his ears. Jamie grabbed his hand under the table, her grip fierce. "Ignore them," she whispered. "They're idiots." But ignoring wasn't enough. As the day dragged on, the taunts grew bolder. Someone taped a rainbow sticker to his locker with "freak" scribbled across it. Elliot's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He wanted to disappear, to shrink into the linoleum floor. Instead, he fled to the art room, the one place at school where he felt safe. There, surrounded by half-finished canvases and the smell of paint, he let himself cry. Ms. Larson, the art teacher, found him hunched over a sketch of a stormy sea. Her kind eyes softened as she sat beside him. "You don't have to tell me what's wrong, Elliot," she said. "But you don't have to face it alone either." Her words were a lifeline, but they couldn't erase the dread pooling in his gut. Connor had betrayed him in the worst way, and now the whole school knew. That evening, at home, Elliot avoided Connor's smug gaze across the dinner table. Their parents, preoccupied with work and bills, didn't notice the tension. "You boys doing okay at school?" their mom asked, distracted. Connor grinned. "Oh, Elliot's making a real name for himself." The words were a knife, and Elliot excused himself, retreating to his room. In the quiet of his bedroom, he texted Jamie, "I can't do this." Her reply came instantly, "You're stronger than you think. We'll fight this together." Her words sparked a flicker of hope, but the weight of humiliation pressed down. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, wondering if he'd ever feel whole again. The next day, things escalated. A group of Connor's football teammates cornered Elliot behind the gym, their laughter sharp and cruel. "What's it like, huh?" one of them taunted, shoving him. Elliot stumbled, his backpack spilling pens and notebooks across the gravel. Before he could respond, Jamie appeared, her voice cutting through the jeers. "Back off, or I'll make sure Coach knows you're harassing a freshman." Her bravado worked. They scattered, but the damage was done. Elliot's world felt like it was crumbling, but Jamie's fierce loyalty kept him grounded. They spent hours that night in her garage, plotting ways to survive the school year. "We need a plan," Jamie said, her eyes blazing. "You're not letting Connor win." Elliot nodded, a spark of determination igniting. He didn't know how, but he'd find a way to reclaim his voice. The days that followed were a blur of whispers and sidelong glances. Elliot felt like he was walking through a minefield, each step risking another explosion of ridicule. But Jamie's plan was bold. They'd fight back with visibility. "If they want to talk about you," she said, her voice steady, "let's give them something worth talking about." Their first move was the school's GSA, Gender and Sexuality Alliance. Elliot had always avoided it, fearing it would make him a bigger target, but Jamie insisted. "You're not alone in this, Elle," she said, dragging him to a meeting after school. The GSA room was a haven of mismatched chairs and rainbow posters, filled with kids who, like Elliot, carried their own battles. There was Mia, a trans girl with a quiet strength, and Leo, a non-binary senior whose sharp humor disarmed even the toughest critics. For the first time, Elliot felt a sense of belonging, like he wasn't the only one fighting. The GSA was planning a talent show to raise awareness, and Jamie convinced Elliot to perform. He'd always loved music, strumming his guitar in secret, but the thought of standing on stage, exposed, made his heart race. "You've got a voice," Jamie said, her eyes fierce. "Use it." Reluctantly, he agreed, choosing a song he'd written about feeling trapped in a small town, a song that felt like his truth laid bare. At home, Connor's bullying didn't stop. He'd leave snide notes in Elliot's room, mocking his fairy music or his girly clothes. Their parents remained clueless, chalking up the tension to sibling rivalry. One night, when Connor accidentally spilled juice on Elliot's guitar, something in Elliot snapped. "Why do you hate me so much?" he shouted, his voice trembling. Connor's smirk faltered, but he only shrugged. "Just toughening you up, little bro." The talent show loomed closer, and Elliot's nerves frayed. He practiced in the art room, where Ms. Larson offered quiet encouragement. "Art's about saying what's true," she told him. "Your music can do that." Her words stuck with him, fueling his resolve. He poured his heart into the song, each chord a rebellion against the shame Connor had tried to bury him under. The night of the talent show, Maplewood High's auditorium buzzed with energy. Elliot peeked from backstage, his palms sweaty. The crowd was a mix of supportive GSA members and skeptical classmates, some whispering his name. Jamie, decked out in a glittery jacket, gave him a thumbs up. "You've got this," she mouthed. When his turn came, Elliot stepped into the spotlight, guitar in hand. The first notes trembled, but as he sang, his voice raw, aching, honest, the room fell silent. The lyrics spoke of longing, of fighting to be seen, of refusing to break. By the final chord, tears stung his eyes, and the applause was deafening. Mia and Leo rushed to hug him, and even some of his classmates looked at him differently, their smirks replaced by something softer. But Connor was in the crowd, his face unreadable. As Elliot left the stage, his brother approached, and for a moment, Elliot braced for another jab. Instead, Connor muttered, "Didn't know you could sing like that." It wasn't an apology, but it was something, an acknowledgement that Elliot wasn't invisible. The performance shifted something at school. Some kids still whispered, but others started saying hi in the halls. The GSA grew, with new faces showing up to meetings. Elliot felt a fragile hope, but the war at home wasn't over. Connor's cruelty flared unpredictably, like a storm that could strike at any moment. One evening, when Elliot overheard Connor bragging to his friends about teaching his brother a lesson, the betrayal cut deeper than ever. Jamie, ever the strategist, suggested they take the fight public. "Let's make a statement," she said, proposing a school-wide campaign about acceptance. They designed posters with messages like "Love is love," and BU, plastering them across the halls. The backlash was swift. Some posters were torn down, and Elliot found "Freak" scrawled on his locker again, but the support surprised him. Teachers like Ms. Larson and even a few football players started wearing rainbow pins. Elliot's courage grew, but so did the tension with Connor. One night, after another cruel remark at dinner, Elliot confronted him in the garage. "What's your problem with me?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the fear. Connor's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Elliot saw a flicker of something, guilt, maybe, in his brother's eyes. "You don't get it," Connor muttered, storming off. The words lingered, a puzzle Elliot couldn't solve. The campaign gained traction, but so did the resistance. A group of Connor's friends, led by a hulking linebacker named Derek, escalated the harassment. They'd trip Elliot in the halls, accidentally knock his books to the floor, or leave crude drawings in his locker. Each incident chipped away at the confidence he'd built, but Jamie and the GSA refused to let him retreat. "We're louder than they are," Jamie insisted, her eyes blazing with defiance. One afternoon, Elliot found a note slipped into his backpack. "Meet me at the bleachers after school." See, his heart sank. Connor hadn't spoken to him since their confrontation in the garage, and the cryptic note felt like a trap. Against his better judgment, he went, telling Jamie to stay close but out of sight. Under the bleachers, Connor stood alone, his usual swagger replaced by something unsteady. "I didn't think it'd go this far," Connor said, his voice low. "The guys, they took it too far." Elliot stared, stunned. Was this an apology? But before he could respond, Derek and his crew appeared, their laughter cutting through the tension. "Ah, look, the brothers are bonding," Derek sneered, pulling out his phone to record. Elliot's stomach dropped as Connor froze, his face a mask of conflict. "Tell them to stop," Elliot said, his voice shaking but firm. Connor hesitated, then muttered, "Leave him alone." The words were weak, but they were enough to make Derek pause. The moment stretched, fragile and uncertain, until Derek shrugged and walked away, his crew trailing behind. Elliot's relief was tempered by the realization that Connor's half-hearted stand wasn't enough to fix the damage. Back at school, the GSA's campaign grew bolder. They organized a day of silence to honor those silenced by prejudice, and Elliot, inspired by Mia's courage, volunteered to speak at the assembly. Standing before the school, his voice wavered as he shared his story, not just the bullying, but the fear of losing himself to others' hate. The auditorium was quiet, and when he finished, the applause was scattered but real. Jamie squeezed his hand, whispering, "You're unstoppable." But the victory was short-lived. That evening, Connor cornered Elliot in their shared bathroom, his face twisted with frustration. "You're making me look bad," he hissed. "Everyone's acting like I'm the villain." Elliot's anger flared. "You outed me, Connor. You made this happen." For a moment, Connor looked like he might argue, but he just turned away, leaving Elliot with a mix of fury and hope. The next week, a new ally emerged, Sarah, a cheerleader who dated Connor briefly. She approached Elliot at lunch, her voice soft but determined. "I know what Connor did," she said, "and I'm sorry. I want to help." Sarah's popularity gave the GSA's message a boost, and soon, more students joined their cause. The school started to feel less like a battlefield, but Elliot knew the war wasn't over. At home, the tension with Connor simmered. Their parents finally noticed, but their attempts at mediation fell flat. "You boys need to work it out," their dad said, oblivious to the depth of the rift. Elliot felt alone, but Jamie and the GSA were his lifeline. They planned a mural project for the school, a vibrant celebration of diversity, and Elliot threw himself into it, painting alongside Mia and Leo. The work was healing, each brushstroke a defiance of the hate he'd faced. One night, Elliot overheard his parents arguing about him. "He's just confused," his mom said, her voice breaking. He needs time. The words hurt, but they also sparked something in Elliot, a need to show them who he was. He started writing letters to his parents, pouring out his feelings, his fears, his hopes. He wasn't ready to give them the letters yet, but the act of writing felt like reclaiming his story. As the mural neared completion, Derek and his crew struck again, defacing it with slurs in the dead of night. The sight of the ruined artwork crushed Elliot, but Jamie rallied the GSA. "We'll repaint it," she said, her voice fierce. "And we'll make it louder." The community response was overwhelming. Students, teachers, even some parents showed up to help. Elliot painted with a fury he didn't know he had, turning the vandalism into a backdrop for a bolder, brighter mural. Through it all, Connor remained a shadow, watching but not joining. Elliot caught him staring at the mural one day, his expression unreadable. For the first time, Elliot wondered if his brother was wrestling with his own demons, but the thought didn't erase the pain of betrayal. The mural's unveiling was a triumph. The courtyard buzzed with students, teachers, and local reporters, all gathered to see the vibrant explosion of color that told stories of love, identity, and resilience. Elliot stood beside Jamie, Mia, and Leo, his heart swelling as the crowd applauded. For a moment, he felt untouchable, like the world couldn't break him. But the high didn't last. At home, Connor's silence grew heavier, his avoidance a constant reminder of the rift between them. Elliot's letters to his parents sat untouched in his desk drawer, their weight growing with each passing day. He wanted to believe they'd understand, but fear held him back. What if they rejected him, too? At school, the tide was turning. The mural had sparked conversations, and more students spoke out against bullying. Sarah's influence helped, her cheerleader friends wearing rainbow bracelets in solidarity. Even Derek's crew seemed quieter, their taunts less frequent. But Elliot knew better than to trust the calm. He'd learned that prejudice could lurk, waiting for a moment to strike. That moment came during a football game. Connor, in his quarterback glory, led the team to victory, but as the crowd cheered, Derek took the microphone during the post-game celebration. "Let's give a shout-out to Elliot Hayes," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Maplewood's favorite artist. The crowd laughed, and Elliot, watching from the bleachers with Jamie, felt the world tilt. Connor stood on the field, his face a mask, doing nothing to stop it. Jamie grabbed Elliot's arm, pulling him away before the tears could fall. "He's not worth it," she said, but her own eyes were wet with anger. They ended up at the art room, where Ms. Larson let them in despite the late hour. Elliot picked up a paintbrush, channeling his hurt into a new canvas, a portrait of a boy standing tall against a storm. "This is you," Ms. Larson said softly, looking at the painting. "Stronger than you know." The next day, Elliot made a decision. He slipped one of his letters under his parents' bedroom door, his heart pounding as he did. The letter was simple but honest, explaining who he was and what he'd faced. He didn't know how they'd react, but he couldn't carry the secret alone anymore. To his surprise, his mom approached him that evening, her eyes red. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, pulling him into a hug. His dad was quieter, his discomfort clear, but he nodded. "We love you, Elliot. We'll figure this out." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. For the first time, Elliot felt like he had a chance at being seen. Connor, however, remained distant. Elliot caught him reading the letter one night, his face pale. "You told them?" Connor asked, his voice sharp. Elliot nodded, bracing for a fight, but Connor just left the room. The silence between them was louder than any argument. The GSA planned a final event for the semester, a community forum on acceptance. Elliot volunteered to speak again, this time alongside Sarah, who'd become a fierce ally. The forum was packed, with parents, students, and even some of Connor's teammates in the audience. Elliot's speech was raw, recounting the pain of being outed, but also the strength he'd found in his friends and himself. The applause was thunderous, and Jamie's proud grin lit up the room. Afterward, Connor approached, his hands shoved in his pockets. "I didn't know it had hurt you that bad," he said, his voice barely audible. Elliot waited, expecting more, but Connor walked away. It wasn't enough, but it was a crack in the wall between them. As winter break approached, Elliot felt a shift. His parents started asking questions, trying to understand. The school's atmosphere softened, with more students joining the GSA. Elliot's music became his outlet, his songs carrying the weight of his journey. He and Jamie started planning a summer road trip, dreaming of cities where they could be themselves without fear. But the past wasn't done with him. One night, Elliot found a note in his locker, and signed but in Connor's handwriting. "I'm sorry." The words were small, but they hit hard. Elliot didn't know if he could forgive his brother, but for the first time, he saw a path to healing, not just for himself, but for his family. Winter break brought a fragile peace. Elliot spent his days with Jamie, painting, playing music, and dreaming of the future. His parents were trying, attending a PFLAG meeting with him, their awkward questions a sign of their effort. Connor, though, remained a mystery, his apology note a flicker of hope that hadn't yet ignited. School resumed, and the GSA's momentum carried on. The mural stood as a symbol of resilience, and Elliot's music found a small but growing audience online. Thanks to Jamie's social media savvy, he started to believe he could be more than the boy who'd been outed. He could be himself, unapologetically. One afternoon, Connor approached Elliot in the school parking lot, his expression nervous. "Can we talk?" he asked. Elliot nodded, wary but curious. They drove to a quiet diner on the edge of town, where Connor finally spoke. "I was scared," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Scared of what people would think of me if they knew my brother was I thought I had to be tough to keep my place." Elliot listened, his anger warring with empathy. "You hurt me," he said simply. Connor nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was honest, and for Elliot, that was enough to start. The brothers began rebuilding, slowly. Connor joined a GSA meeting, sitting awkwardly in the back, but his presence spoke volumes. He stopped his friends from making cruel jokes, and once, when Derek tried to start trouble, Connor shut him down with a quiet, "He's my brother." The words were small, but they carried weight. Elliot's music grew bolder, his songs weaving stories of pain and hope. At the spring talent show, he performed again, this time with Jamie on backup vocals. The crowd included his parents, who clapped with pride, and Connor, who stayed until the end. When Elliot sang about forgiveness, not just for others, but for himself, the room felt electric with possibility. The school year ended with a sense of closure. The GSA's efforts had changed Maplewood High, with new anti-bullying policies and a growing culture of acceptance. Elliot's relationship with his parents deepened, their conversations more open. Connor was still learning, but he was trying, and Elliot chose to meet him halfway. On the last day of school, Elliot and Jamie stood by the mural, now a permanent fixture in the courtyard. "We did this," Jamie said, her voice thick with emotion. Elliot nodded, his heart full. He'd been broken, betrayed, and humiliated, but he'd also found his voice, his people, and his strength. As they walked away, Elliot glanced back at the mural, its colors bright against the Virginia sky. He thought of the boy he'd been a year ago, scared and hiding, and the boy he was now, still scared sometimes, but unafraid to be seen. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was his, and he'd walk it with Jamie by his side, his family learning to follow, and his heart open to the possibility of love, not just for others, but for himself.